All right, welcome back to Breathing Underwater's Moviecast. I am finally here after all these years and all the discussions that we've had off mic with my bestie, Jason from Baltimore, who I grew up with. Quick history before we get into the meat of this stuff. Jason and Dave, who you've heard on this podcast many times, and I met in 5th grade at Severn Elementary, right, in like Severn, Maryland. My brother and I had just moved from Buffalo, relocated to Maryland because my dad was working in the Army Field Band at Fort Meade. We met at school. One of the earliest memories of us was playing It from the Pit on the playground.
Oh, God.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That was a board game that we need to resurrect. It from the Pit. We've known each other since before we had good taste in music and movies. We developed all that together. Jason was like our triplet from another mother. We introduced each other and exposed each other to so much stuff. You know, we were in our first band together. We learned our instruments together, and all the developmental formative years were spent as a trio. Jason even lived with Dave and me for a while in high school when he was, his parents were transitioning houses and stuff. So we got a long history, but that kind of leads us to now. We always talk about movies and stuff that were, we've always had shared interest in over the years. There's so many, like franchises that we were all in together that we grew up with and exposed each other together. All the big ones like Jurassic Park and Aliens and Terminator and Back to the Future and Star Wars. And, we were always watching this stuff together. But, as the years have gone on and these franchises have struggled for market share and to stay relevant, I think we've all had a similar kind of reaction that you're hearing like rippling through the internet. It's not just us, but we were there at the inception of some of these things. And the reason that we decided to do this now was because you saw Jurassic Park Dominion, right? Which I haven't.
If you saw the last Fast and Furious, you saw it.
So, and I didn't see the last Fast and Furious for that same reason. I've enjoyed those movies up until the point, but when I saw the trailer and I heard some of the buzz of like the latest Fast and Furious, I was like, I don't think I want to sit through this. And we'll circle back to this, but it just sounds at this point like content. It doesn't sound like they had a story to tell. It doesn't sound like they had a passion to tell it. It just sounds like they needed to keep their franchise going. So they came up with whatever. Who cares about the characters and the story? That's not the important part. The important part is that they're releasing something that's not a big scale spectacle. It doesn't even matter if it's timeless, if it has any lasting power at all. It's just like, will it make money the opening weekend? Will it keep the franchise alive? Will it keep the rights in the studio's hands? Will it keep merchandise coming off the shelf? Whatever, will it keep it like alive in the public consciousness and zeitgeist? I don't have any inside information, but just based on just the content alone, like, would you say that's true about Fast and Furious and Jurassic Park that you saw recently?
Well, I think a lot of it is kowtowing to other countries. Akasha Singh was talking about with Bollywood. He's like, India's just starting to do well enough where they're starting to make serious movies. They never made serious movies before, in his words, because they were doing so bad financially that people would go to the movie as an escape and just fun, happy, bright thing. They see a movie every week. It's what they do. Bollywood pumps out hundreds of thousands of movies, and
it's just like it's like an activity. It's not like a artistry.
Yeah. China has a certain style of movie they like, and American movies make more money over there than they do here. So they've changed to that model of like instant gratification with everything in the movie. Like there's a problem. They meet someone, instantly this person will risk the life for them, give up everything, and they solve the problem. It's all happy and over. Instant. You know what I mean? It's very weird. And Jurassic Park had that. They met a woman who worked as a pilot transporting underground sold dinosaurs from the black market. She had seen the cloned kid that was in the other one was being stolen, let it happen, transported her. Then met the pseudo parents, Chris Pratt and whoever his wife's name is, or the girl in the movie. And she just gave up everything to fly into the island or wherever and rescue the kid. And then there's just new dinosaurs to fight. And like Chris Pratt fights a dinosaur with a knife. Like, it's what the hell are we doing here?
By the way, I just want to point out that if you hear any adorable cooing or anything, it's because Jason had a baby a little while ago, Apollo. And we were talking about before we started rolling, it's a tradition on this podcast to have baby and kid sounds in the background because that's just the nature of our lives.
Getting old.
Yeah. But wiser.
I don't know about
So
that.
so let's stick with Jurassic Park though. You wanted to do this because you saw that and you wanted to rant about it a little bit. What was like your visceral reaction to it?
I
Because
hated every.
like based on the fact that we saw Jurassic Park together when it first came out, and we were like so big into it. We bought the toys and the comics and behind the scenes like magazines, and like we were
Oh
so
yeah.
obsessed with not just how fun the dinosaurs or the characters themselves. Oh, and of course, like we read all the Michael Crichton stuff. Jurassic
Oh yeah.
Park probably got us into reading higher level stuff at that age. I think we were like what, in like fourth or fifth grade, or maybe fifth, sixth grade when we started reading like, exclusively like Michael Crichton's catalog and stuff, because we were so floored by the movie. But it wasn't just that. I remember having like a making of book that I got, I don't know, like at a Barnes and Noble or something, that had like all the conceptual art and storyboards and early script drafts. And, as a kid, like it was my entry point into film, not just as like, like you were saying, like a passive kind of like activity or entertainment or escapism, but like as a medium for like artistry and telling stories. And I think like that laid the seeds early on. And Jurassic Park was probably, Star Wars and Jurassic Park were really early inceptions of this idea of like, oh, what does it actually mean to be a filmmaker, not just a consumer of movies. So we have that whole like background and history and emotional stakes around this stuff. So
Well,
now we're
yeah.
at this point. I don't know about you, but I had hope that even though I thought Jurassic World was passable, but the more I've seen it and thought about it since, it's just really stupid, but it was enjoyable. It was escapism.
Yeah.
And then Fallen Kingdom, I thought was so bad. It was amazingly fun. It was so silly and farcical, and it was like edited like a comedy. You know what occurred to me the other day was that Fallen Kingdom was basically a whole movie of the Dennis Nedry death scene with the Dilophosaurus. It never really occurred to me before. If Jurassic Park was an album, the Dennis Nedry death scene would have been the skip track for me, just
So
because like it's fun and entertaining, but it didn't fit the tone of the rest of the movie because it's edited and presented almost more like a slapstick comedy where he keeps falling down. You know what I mean? And there's like sound effects, and he keep
it,
thinking that he's like on top of the situation, but he's really not. And then it all blows up in his face at the end. It was almost more laughable than it was scary. Like the rest of them, like when the T-Rex attacks the kids or the raptors, that was like
that was
presented like
actually
a whole.
scary.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
scary. The Nedry stuff was silly, and then Fallen Kingdom I realized was like a whole movie of that tone and that presentation. And I enjoyed it for what it was. I thought it was stupid, but I thought it was so much fun because I was laughing at it the whole time. So I at least had hope. If Dominion wasn't going to be good, I hoped it would be so bad it was good, like Fallen Kingdom. But you're telling me that that's not the case.
Okay. So the whole plot of it is Dotson,
Dodson! Dodson! We've got Dodson here!
the original guy who tried to
Right.
get embryos from Nedry. His
Dotson,
company.
we got Dotson here.
Well, he's in this movie. He's the bad guy, and he took
Okay.
over in Gen. This whole movie has nothing but nostalgia. Every other scene's nostalgia. In his office, he has a raptor claw. He has that rotten can, the Barbasol can, in his office. Somehow they found it after I think that island blew up.
In the book, it did.
Yeah. So he has that. He actually dies by Dilophosauruses like Nedry.
Come on.
It's just so bad. Like at one point, this kid escapes the facility they're at that's in Antarctica, I think, but they have this giant tropical paradise in the middle of the snow mountains somehow. And a kid
Okay.
escapes. Well, Chris Pratt and his girl are flying over this, and they have some kind of radar that keep the dinosaurs from flying away and like this. So they're flying over this island. They get attacked by that big pterodactyl thing you see in the trailer. Anyway, they crash land. The mom character parachutes out and lands, somehow gets through this sort of secluded Jurassic Park into the facility. They're in a Jeep they stole. It wrecks, flips, and lands next to their daughter who escaped the facility too in the middle of the jungle. And she's like, oh, my parents are here in the middle of this giant thing. I'm like, wait, what? Like, how?
What?
It's just so bad. Like Chris Pratt and the girl land, and they land on like an iceberg kind of thing, and there's a velociraptor that can like swim underwater that has feathers and comes out and attacks them.
Everything you're saying is just echoing what I've heard already online, which is why I refuse to see it. It's also why I refuse, and we'll get into it later, but I refuse to see The Rise of Skywalker because it sounds like when they wrote this script, they just didn't care.
The Rise of Skywalker? That was a giant piece of too. Watch that, the Fast and Furious movie or Jurassic World. They're all the exact same movie. They have super fast cuts. They explain away everything super fast. And before you know it, you're in another action set piece. And it makes no sense. There's no logic to it. It's incredible. Like, I don't know if they just don't want to pay writers anymore or what it is, but like they're unwatchable.
That's the thing. That's what I don't understand is it feels like they're not even trying.
Well, they're not. Like,
because how big is your ego where it's a total home run at the end of Fallen Kingdom to say, okay, dinosaurs are out in the world now. This is what we've wanted. It's what they've teased since The Lost World. All we wanted to see is like humans versus dinosaurs en masse, you know, just a simple, straightforward plot.
It started out that way. Like,
but then it didn't get started. There's like locusts and espionage and crap, right?
Yeah. The company InGen or Biosin, whatever they call it now, by the guy from the first movie, they made locusts that would only eat other people's crops, not their genetic crops. Well, the locusts ate everyone's crops, and they were supposed to die off after a few weeks, and they just multiplied. So the whole world's going to end.
It's just like the lysine
because of these locusts. Yeah, exact same plot. And in the beginning, it is dinosaurs are roaming Earth, and they're capturing them. And Chris Pratt's on a horse chasing dinosaurs in the snow, and it's kind of neat. And then all of a sudden it goes to, he has this genetically the twin kid or the whatever it is, clone.
Yeah, I know. And they kind of like retcon that too. I heard
it made
like
it worse.
Clone thing.
Well, it made it worse because originally it was the guy cloned his daughter. Well, it changed from the daughter cloned herself and gave birth to herself. And her DNA is what they used to kill the locusts. Yeah.
But why? Okay, so that was my point, is why the writers thought that some locust thing and cloning people, like nobody wanted this.
No. And then like
how disconnected are they from their own audience that they would think that somebody I mean, obviously it's making money, so I'm not saying that it's not working necessarily, but the franchise, and that's really what the theme of this episode is like the franchise has been dead for so long. Done. Now it's just a veneer, a covering, you know, a mask of something that we recognize, but the content itself is, like you said, it's just the same basic crap that doesn't matter, that has no lasting effect.
What I noticed with these movies, and like, yeah, they're just taking a name, they licensed it, and they're putting it out there. It's almost creepy how they do it, but it's all the same movie because I think they don't even have movies. I think they just have a board and says this is a cool action set piece, and then they're just like, well, we're making a Jurassic Park, let's just put that in there. And it's just like, all right, well, we'll tag this name with this set piece, we need 8 more set pieces, and then they just do it because like Fast and Furious, the last one, they go to space in a car for whatever reason. Ludacris knows how to make a car that can go to space, so that happens, and it's the dumbest thing you've ever seen in your life. Or like, oh, let's get a big guy like The Rock, Hobbs and Shaw movie. It's terrible, but it's funny and passable. But The Rock going onto a car and a helicopter at the same time. That
was fun.
It's so dumb though. He'd just be torn in half. I mean, I guess they're superheroes now. Yeah, it's fun.
Well, that started after like what, 5?
I just feel like it's almost maybe Alien 3 started it, where it was just like they had a movie, and I rewatched the making of that. They originally, aliens were supposed to come to Earth. And that was the whole thing. And they shot intro.
It's what we all wanted.
And then they just didn't make that movie. And they just started filming. And just like, I think we have enough. I think that's what they do now. I guess CGI is cheap enough, so it doesn't matter. They can just come up with an idea. Like, we want Chris Pratt riding a horse with dinosaurs. We want dinosaurs running through Italy, killing people. We want a pterodactyl attacking a plane.
So they just like contrive a totally uninspired,
like a cool thing.
Not even story, but just like a series of events to get to these sequences that they have preordained. So
like, I don't.
Is that what you're saying?
Did you read World War Z, the book?
Yes. Oh man, it was so good. Actually, dude, I listened to it on audiobook, and it was narrate like every chapter, every character had its own voice actor, and there were like Henry Rollins did it, and a bunch of people that like people you would recognize. It was really cool.
But that didn't have like a coherent story for one character through the whole thing. When they made the movie, it didn't work because that wasn't what it was.
Right.
You know?
It was like an oral history. Yeah.
And the way that works in books is great. I don't think it translates to film. It almost seems like they're making movies that way now. Like all these different pieces that don't go together, just shove them together, and it kind of works in book form, but not on film, you know? Because like the other plot of this movie was what happened that drove me crazy. I mean, all of it drove me crazy. I was just so upset, like the whole thing. But there was the end. So they make a big dinosaur, bigger than a T-Rex. They show up for 2 seconds. It fights the T-Rex. It just bites it on the face. The T-Rex cowers and walks away. At the end of the movie, there's another dinosaur. I forgot. There's so much jibber jabber. When the woman lands, that parachutes out of the plane and just learns how to parachute in 2 seconds. She lands in a swamp area, and a big dinosaur that has like giant talons that are 10 feet long chases her, but it's blind. Does everything off sound. Yeah. So they bring that
because
back.
of Quiet Place.
Yeah. So they bring that back at the end of the movie. They bring back the T-Rex. They bring out the giant dinosaur because this thing catches on fire, and they have a compound. So they press a button. It makes all the dinosaurs come into the compound. The T-Rex battles the big dinosaur. Gets beat up, almost dies, just like in Jurassic World. It lays there basically dead. Then this bird dinosaur starts attacking this dinosaur, gets beat up, and the T-Rex runs, hits the big dinosaur onto the other one's claws, and it like catches it and spikes the other one. And that's the big battle. It took 2 seconds. It was horrible. And then like the T-Rex and this other dinosaur become friends. And you're like,
come on.
They just like kind of nod to each other, like, yeah. Like, why? Even the kids are like, this is dumb. I'm like, I know.
Did you take your kids?
No, I rented it. I rented that for $19.
I was gonna say,
no, I would have left the theater. I mean, what was it? If you could name it, talking about this movie, like, what was the first franchise to really go off the rails and be terrible but still make money? Like, to me, it's Pirates of the Caribbean. It was still making money hand over fist. And
I was gonna say Star Wars, but
but Pirates did it before, right? Like they're the most, I guess. Yeah, maybe Star Wars.
I'm never going to be a prequels apologist. I don't care what the internet says.
You were.
Come around on those.
You were. You remember back when we first saw it?
Oh, when Phantom Menace first came out, yeah. We were all hoodwinked.
Well,
and we were teenagers. I didn't know any better.
We left, and they were like, my dad was like, that was garbage. I made him go see opening night at like 1 a.m. when we could get tickets. And he was like, that's so bad. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, you had the same sentiment. I was like, yeah, but it's Star Wars. Then you get a little older and you're like, yeah, that's not okay. It's just because it's Star Wars. Yeah, so maybe they were the first because they were trash.
But I hear what you're saying about Pirates.
Well, I left the theater for, I think, the second one or third one. I was like, I can't take this. I tried watching the fifth one recently with the kids. Apparently, there's 5 of them. I didn't make it, but 10 minutes in.
I think we tried watching one. I don't remember which one it was something after the third one. And with the kids, and we all like 10 minutes, we were like, this sucks. We just turned it off. What?
I did. I watched the final one and I didn't understand what's happening. So I read the synopsis. Basically, they're all still alive. Everyone that supposedly died was still alive. And
of course,
who's the bad captain, the one that Johnny Depp's always fighting? He sacrifices himself to save his daughter at the end and dies. I think the whole plot of the movie is trying to get the Black Pearl out of a little ship in a bottle jar. They can't get it out. And there's some another super, like, worse than the other bad captains that are all supernatural guy, like Davy Jones or something. I don't know. It's just so bad. Like, I remember watching it, and just like the kids were like, why don't we turn it off? And I'm like, oh.
And that's tough because, like, when Disney makes a movie, it's supposed to be as palatable for the whole, for the broadest demographic as possible. So when everybody in the room is like, well,
I think
that's not good.
Like, even trying to explain it to you right now, if watching it once or twice, it makes no sense because that's just it. They're doing too much with the movie. Like Jurassic Park had one plot, like one linear thing going through the whole thing. There wasn't 18 different sub characters. It
was simple.
Yeah.
Not that simple has to equate to brainless or even like lazy or whatever, but simple sometimes can just mean, like, I think it can be also, synonymous with engaging and tension. Like your basic fundamentals of storytelling, and especially for the big screen, is you want to engross your audience into an experience. And if they're left the whole time, like, what the hell is happening? There's like so much stuff happening, and it's happening so fast, and it's so much plot. That's what I'm saying about the egos of these writers for like Dominion, for instance, or Fast and Furious or whatever, is like, it sounds like they thought that all these crazy ideas would be so cool in their own head. But I mean, that's how we were when we were in like 5th grade when we met and we were making up games on the playground to play. Like, wouldn't it be cool if like King Kong fought a velociraptor and then a T-Rex showed up and then the aliens came, and that kind of stuff, it sounds fun in theory, But then you actually, like, if you're trying to tell a story, if you don't give characters a chance to be characters, if they're just running from like sequence to sequence and dumb contrived plot point to plot point, you don't care about them or their struggles or their conflict. And then if there's so much stuff happening, like locusts and dinosaur black market trade and espionage and going on, and Malcolm and all these legacy characters getting back together, and all this stuff,
Oh yeah, Grant and
clones.
Ellie fell in love and they're making out by the end of it, which, like,
Oh
come on,
God.
man.
It's like, how could you ever get engaged with it? How could there be tension in the story? Is it like you don't have enough time to really care about the characters? You don't have time to understand like how the plot all fits together. There's no conflict that's apparent. There's no tension that leads from scene to scene. It's just a bunch of stuff. It's like we played with toys when we were a kid. We had all of our toy figures. We dump them all out and we make them battle.
Yeah.
But
And then
it
you
was
break
fun.
them and they're gone. And it seems like that's
It
what
was
they're
fun
doing
to
with
play
franchises.
with. That's a great analogy. I like that.
I think Netflix and HBO kind of ruined everyone's idea on making a movie. It's like, you never watched Game of Thrones, but did you?
I didn't. No.
It
Because
was
of all the
great,
feedback
but
I got. People were like, "Oh, it's so great. It's so much like horrible stuff and horrible people doing horrible things." And I'm like, "No, I don't. That doesn't sound fun to me. Sorry."
yeah, it's definitely that, but it's also really cool and good. But it took what, 8 years and
Yeah.
hundreds of characters, and it was all convoluted. But you had an hour chunk at a time, hour and a half chunk at a time, over 10 to 15 episodes a season to get it. Just an hour and a half movie, or Jurassic World was like 2.5 hours. Or this new one was like 2.5 hours. Like, there's so much happening. There's no time to explain anything.
Yeah.
No time to do anything, and they just cram it
Or
in,
process.
and yeah, you need one simple story.
Where things build, from something to something else. It's not just random events that the
Yeah,
characters just have to deal with so they can move on to the next thing.
like, I was
There's
really
no
trying to think about what we both still like, that's still making movies that's old as that's good. I can only think of like one franchise altogether.
What do you got?
Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
Those are still fun.
Yeah.
It's one plot per movie, and that's it.
And they can get convoluted, but you're hooked on the characters enough to care.
And their set pieces
and
are awesome, but like, it's just,
yeah.
it makes sense in the context of the movie, not just.
And they usually lead to something like climactic events. They build on each other. It's not just a bunch of like random things that don't seem to matter.
Yeah, but they're still palatable. I think they started one way and they're still that way. Like, it's not going to be blow your mind. It's not going to be fine art, but it's just fun. I'm going to watch it and have fun. Whereas, like,
That's true. Like,
franchises we grew up with, like, ugh.
You brought up some stuff. Let's go through the list a little bit here now.
Okay.
The list that I have, and then you can add on anything. So you mentioned Aliens. I think Aliens predates all this stuff for us because you were shown the original Alien by your dad, at least the chest burster scene, when you were like 5 or something, right? Scared the hell out of you.
Well, I mean, he tried to make me watch the whole thing. I ran away screaming. Best thing ever.
But I remember even then, like, you were allowed to watch rated R stuff before I was. So like, I had Aliens from a TV cut with commercials and edited out for content and dialogue that was changed and stuff. Thing about, at least in my family, because we weren't allowed to watch like rated R stuff till we were, I think, about like 14ish, my brother and I, we were still allowed to read a lot of the adjacent stuff, like the comics and some of the novelizations and video games and stuff. So like, we were into those franchises before we were, like, even Jurassic Park. I think I was allowed to read the book before I was allowed to actually see the movie in the theater.
Really?
And it was one of those, I'm pretty sure, because it was one of those movies that was out in theaters for so long. Like, it was like in, at least, remember Jumper's Hole, our cheap theaters?
Oh, where you take a trash bag in and you get as much popcorn as you want.
Yeah, they would be playing the stuff that was out of like the regular theaters, but they would keep it going for a while, and it was cheaper.
Like $1. Yeah,
I think I saw Jurassic Park there like 6 times, but that was like 2 years after it had come out. You know, so in that time I was allowed to see it. But Aliens and Terminator, those are 2 franchises that fit into this perfectly for me too, because Aliens, I remember being super interested in and kind of terrified by the concept of them. And when I finally was allowed to see the first 2 Alien movies and then eventually the third, and that's interesting that you had brought up Alien 3 as like the beginning of the end, in terms of like having more of the place they were trying to get to before they actually had like a good story.
Well, the saddest part was it wasn't even that as much as like the one guy he may have been the AD or something like that. He was like, we had a release date. He's like, we had a
Right.
release date. We didn't have a
Yep.
movie. We had half a set and a release date, and that was it. It's like, what? It's crazy.
That's tenfold now. I mean, that's every time a movie makes any money on opening weekend, they set the sequel release date sometimes years in advance.
Oh yeah.
I understand it as a business choice, you know, a way to like keep the hype. And things are different than when we were kids too, because hype was different before the internet.
Yeah.
Now it's like the more you can keep stuff hype, the more it's trending and the more they can predict like what the box office returns and merchandise returns are going to be. But even so, yeah, it's like if you give yourself this arbitrary deadline for something and you're talking about a mostly creative project, things change and things evolve. And if you don't have a story to tell, but you have a time where that story has to be told, you're going to run into these problems.
Well, I think that Aliens is a perfect example because 1 and 2 were great. 3 it wasn't what anyone wanted, but it was kind of cool.
Yeah, I'll always love that one. I have a place in my heart for that one. Yeah,
I enjoy it because, and my point with this is they did the same thing, but in reverse with Prometheus. Prometheus, I loved. I thought it was great. It was super slow. There wasn't any craziness in it. There's some cool set pieces, and you fell in love with what I would say is the new Ripley, or at least I did. Mm-hmm. And then the internet complained. There weren't xenomorphs, there weren't aliens, and they made the second one. It just ruined everything.
Oh, it was awful.
It was so dumb. It was beautiful.
I actually enjoyed Covenant though.
Like, did you?
Only because I enjoyed it the same way that I enjoyed Fallen Kingdom. It was so stupid and silly. It was like more like a comedy or a farce or a parody. I know it wasn't meant to be that, but I enjoyed it on that level. Just watching it, like, all right, this sucks.
I was fine with it up until they just ruined the whole thing of where the aliens came from.
Oh my God.
And you could have someone get infected and like 2 minutes later, like there's full grown aliens running around. Like what? Like,
going back to the prequels, Star Wars prequels, like did nobody learn from the midichlorian stuff? Nobody wants to know. Remember the Patton Oswalt skit? If I had a time machine and a shovel, I would go back and deal with George Lucas before he makes the prequels. He's like, I'm going to butcher it because I'm not good at recounting comedy, but he's like, he meets George Lucas in the past and he's like, hey, do you like Darth Vader? Oh, I love Darth Vader. He's like the coolest villain, ever in the history of movies. And he's like, well, would you like to see him as a little boy? Yeah. No, I don't want to see that. Like his whole thing, he was like, I like the stuff I like. I don't care where it came from. Would you like ice cream? Oh, I love ice cream. Well, here's a bag of rock salt. He's like, I don't care where the stuff I like comes from. I just like the stuff I like. And there's something to be said about that. Okay, here's the thing. It's not only that when these filmmakers go back, it's almost like when bands are like, we're going to go back to our roots, and then they don't, and it sucks. To me, it's not just that they're going back and they're filling in gaps. If they want to prequel and expand the lore and stuff, totally fine, whatever. But don't act like what you already set up didn't happen. That's the thing I think that bugged people more about the prequels is the inconsistencies leading up to. That's what bugged me. I mean, the fact that those are awful movies and I don't care. It's so crazy to me how the internet has taken this turn about those where they're like, well, but actually, if you get past the bad acting and the bad sets and all of that and everything that's bad, there's an interesting story underneath it. It's like, that's not the point. Like, yeah, okay, maybe it's an interesting like political story, but the presentation of it, the execution of it is still bad, and that doesn't make it an enjoyable film experience. It doesn't make the movie good in hindsight just because you've picked them apart and distilled them down to what the intentions were. And that's what the internet has been doing with those. But my point is that Lucas went back and he changed the lore. Ridley Scott did it too. They act like whatever they made originally didn't happen, or that because they were the original creators that they have free reign, which they do, sure, but it doesn't mean I have to like it or condone it or pay money for it.
I don't think they do.
Like, do you think Ridley Scott went back and watched Alien and was like, oh yeah, I implied all this stuff, and then he made Prometheus and Covenant and was like, oh totally, I have this all mapped out. I think he was just like, I don't care, I made that thing 40 years ago, I'm gonna do whatever I feel like now.
Prometheus had a great out. Like, it could have done whatever it wanted. It could have been that the engineers, those people, they made the alien, or it was a failed mistake when they were world building and they made this monster, and that would have been fine. And nothing Prometheus would have done would have affected Aliens or Alien 1. It wouldn't have affected any of that. It could have been, you know, the engineer's derelict spaceship. It could have been their weapon that they harvested. That's fine. They didn't need to do all this other stuff where some robot made this thing.
Oh my God.
Like, that's so dumb. And he had out because we didn't know anything about the past. There's no hint to this universe, no hint to any of it. And they just ruined all of it for some reason. And then the intent is the problem I have with everything. Like, you don't need to understand why something has this thing. Like, you're not going to go back. It'd be like if Spielberg remade Jaws and they show a baby great white getting abused by a person. So then it grows up and kills people. Like, we don't need to know. If the alien's ultimate weapon, cool. But I don't need to know. You don't need to make up a story about one company, the Wayland company. You don't need to go back and say that Mr. Wayland is the whole reason the alien ever came about. There never needs to be a connection. There can be an evil corporation that treats its people like and they happen to stumble upon this other species weapon. That's fine. It doesn't need to be he convolutedly made it because he made a robot and then that robot went insane and killed people that worked for him and found the engineer's like secret sauce and then made a monster out of it. Like, what the is that? Why? You need any of that.
I think it goes back to what you were saying about the other stuff is they had an idea or a setting or something. And the studio was like, we really want to keep, because remember at the same time they were developing Covenant, they were developing Alien 4 with
which would have been great.
Neil Blomkamp. Unless there was studio interference, I feel like Blomkamp would have done a really good job. But
that's what we wanted to see,
yeah, which is so weird. But I feel like they defaulted to what they thought was the safe bet, was the name recognition of Ridley Scott, you know, the guy who created Alien in the first place. But they just like gave him free reign, and then he was like, well, I don't really have a story to really tell here, even though he said that Prometheus was supposed to be a 5-part series. I don't buy that because
I could see it, but they obviously the studio is going to say no a second. It didn't make as much money as they thought.
Yeah.
You know, they want to salvage their IP or whatever. But
and that's, I think that's all it really was just like, they're like, just whatever. We don't really care what you do. Just put in xenomorphs, just put in something recognizable. So he was like, all right, I'll just slap together, you know, some stuff. And
yeah, like the first one was really cool. And if it had led to eventually there being an alien and like going to the engineer's planet, which is what everyone wanted to see, or anything, but having the robot be the one who in the end, it's just so, it was so useless. No one needed to know that or care.
Well, speaking of robots, Terminator, dude, that like Terminator,
Jesus Christ.
I'd say the movies that really inspired me to go, you know, to look at like film school as a career option was Jurassic Park, Star Wars, Terminator, and Aliens. But Terminator, I remember like, and it was around the same time. I think, you know, I watched that a little bit younger than I was really ready for. I was like in 5th grade, and my dad friend came to town and was like, you guys never seen Terminator 2? And, you know, I hadn't seen anything like that violent and that intense up until that point. So it blew my mind, like, you know, especially her dream sequence with the nuclear fallout was just, it gave me nightmares. But the movie was so groundbreaking, you know, technologically, that I was looking at not just as like I was engrossed in this experience, but there's so much stuff that I was curious about. Like, I wanted to know, like, how did they make the T-1000? How did Arnold have the skeleton T-800 arm when he pulls off the skin, you know? And it made me like want to look at the behind the scenes stuff. I remember Blockbuster had a director's cut that had those extra scenes in it with like Reese and stuff. And they had some behind the scenes stuff. Like they showed the scene with Linda Hamilton and her twin in the mirror that they cut out. Yeah. So crazy, innovative spirit that went into making that kind of stuff. It was like, and that's really what it comes down to for me is like, you know, Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, for Alien and Aliens, for Back to the Future trilogy and the original Star Wars movies, the filmmakers had a script. They had a story that they needed to tell. They were like, this is my passion. They did not have the technology all laid out in front of Lord of the Rings is another one too. Like they had the story. They really were passionate about telling it, and they had to innovate ways to make it happen. They had to problem solve. They had to be creative. They had to be collaborative. They had to, like Lucas always said that like his special editions of the OG trilogy were like the way he really wanted it to be. I don't buy that for a second, because yes, when he made those movies, he probably didn't expect to have like cheap Halloween masks in the cantina He probably had different ideas, but he had to make it work for what the limitations that he had. But that made him be more
he's his own
creative.
worst enemy
It
with
made him
everything.
take more risks.
I mean, he's his own worst enemy with everything. I mean,
yeah,
he just really.
But I
is.
think that's true with Ridley Scott and going from Alien to Covenant and everything. Like you see a similar kind of hubris in the filmmaking where they rely too much on the technology, that it gives them an out to be lazier storytellers because they can do anything with the amount of money and the technology that they have. Just like the special editions, or like the stuff that he added to that didn't add to the quality of the story. It just added some flair and convoluted stuff to the frame. Like that scene with Jabba the Hutt, just because he was able to really badly computer animate Jabba in the first Star Wars, where he's talking to Han before they take off and Mos Eisley.
Oh, yeah.
That scene was already shot. He just superimposed a CGI Jabba for a human Jabba. The story was already there. It wouldn't have made a difference if they had kept that in originally and then he just added the Jabba slug later. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? Like the story is to me is always the important part. And like Terminator 2, for instance, is a perfect example of, and Terminator 1, where Cameron had a story that he wanted to tell and he had to innovate to make it happen. And that made it all that much better, as opposed to, now where we are with Genesis and Dark Fate. And I get Dark Fate's another one that I won't see.
Which one was that? The last one?
Dark Fate was the most recent one with Linda Hamilton, and Edward Furlong was
shockingly.
You had said it wasn't
better
horrible.
than any of the. It's not good, but there are some scenes where you can be like, "Oh, Cameron had something to do with that. This is part of him." But I think all of it went bad. And you kind of said something earlier. We said something about China, and everyone's supposed to like this and make it for all markets and all people. And like Terminator 3 is a good example of that. They just start cutting anything that could offend anyone, or anything that would not even offend, but cut a certain amount of people off of seeing it. And it just, studios just have this weird thing. And like, I didn't always believe it, but they just ruin so many movies. Like they take away everything that made the first one amazing and just make it, because they're like, well, Terminator 1 or Terminator 2 made this much money, but imagine if we had a girl Terminator for no reason and this all happened. And we rated PG-13. Now more people will see it. Like, no.
But it's so obvious. It's so obvious that when they do that kind of stuff, they're just pandering to what they think is going to make their stupid sheeple audience be like, oh, I haven't seen a female Terminator yet. That's so new and interesting.
No one's going to care.
Audiences are smarter than that. We know when we're being pandered to and spoon-fed. Even like casual audiences know when something is, when they're treating you like an idiot. Even little kids, when you talk down to little kids, they know you're talking down to them. Even if they don't understand the context, they know when they're being treated like a kid. Just like audience members of movies know when they're being treated like idiots.
I was just thinking, because I'm looking at Ed 109 or whatever it is, like, even Robocop 3.
Oh, Robocop. Like, oh God.
Or Turtles in Time. Like, I love the first one. Turtles. Yeah. It's so bad. I love it. And the second one's worse, but I love it. But that's campy fun. I don't know.
I disagree. I think the first one is actually a really good movie on a lot of different levels.
Well, it was, the first one had a soul to it. The second one was so silly, it was great. Mm-hmm. But again, I read an article at studios like, the first one was too violent. We don't want anyone using their weapons and blah, blah, blah. And it's like,
they use like hot dogs and
a turtle with a sword and they can't hit anyone with it. Like, what?
That goes back to too, like a lot of these films, when they're first conceptualized and made, they're risky. Terminator 2 were risky bets because nobody ever seen anything like that before. An Alien and Back to the Future, that they were risky movies. They didn't have a foundation already laid. Ninja Turtles didn't have, and Robocop didn't have, like a franchise to already. They had to take risks. So part of taking a risk was to tell the story that they wanted to tell and have faith that audiences would connect with it. And then, like you said, by the time like Secret of the Ooze came out or whatever, then the studio got worried. They started to hedge their bets. They're like, okay, we know that this is a money-making franchise, but we don't want to scare anybody away. Actually, that's really interesting that you say that, because like, what was that, like 1989, 1990 or something, that Turtles 1 came out? Yeah, and there was all the, like kids were fighting on the buses, and you heard these stories. and like parents complained. That's the same thing we're seeing now with the internet reacting to, oh, I didn't like this, or, you know, like all the down votes on trailers or all the bad publicity that, you know, movie reviews get on YouTube and stuff. And the studios are like reacting to fan reactions as opposed to saying, we have a really good story to tell and we have faith in that. Yeah, maybe some people won't like it, but it
That's
will
how it's
be
supposed
good
to be.
enough. Yeah. No story is for everybody. And that's Disney's problem, is Disney's trying to make all their stuff for everybody. And it's not working. I think it's starting to not work for anybody.
Well, I think Disney's main problem, and I think the last one was their last animated movie. People don't die. There's no heartbreak in the newer ones. Like Moana didn't die. The rock character didn't die. There was no mom or dad that died in the beginning. All early Disney movies broke your heart, you know?
Yeah.
And then they just
in like
it.
traumatic ways.
Like even the last one, the one that was in New Orleans, it was cute. It was their last big animated one.
I like that one, except
there's a
for what you're
cricket that
about
was
to say.
talking. Yeah, he got stepped on and died. The cricket is horrible. Like my kids cried.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I cried at Lion King. Mustafa dies. It's horrible. Still hurts me, you know? Like
it's powerful storytelling.
But they got rid of all that for just everyone to be happy for no reason.
Well, like Soul, I thought Soul was excellent.
No, Soul was good.
You know, climaxing in him sacrificing himself.
Yeah.
Then they backpedal on it and he got a second chance. It's like, no, I totally agree with you on that too. Well, and speaking of Disney too, this ties back into Star Wars. Talked around Star Wars a lot, but Star Wars is another one. I mean, Star Wars has been talked to death. We don't have to get into it too deep, but I just want to make the point, you know, I think it goes with the Marvel stuff too, is that Star Wars, I liked The Last Jedi when I saw it in the theater, and then another one that I know, yeah, you had like the reverse effect. I liked it as an experience, and then the more I thought about it, the more I dug into it, the more I started to really detest it. But that's why I wouldn't see Rise of Skywalker. But I was interested once everybody was like, The Mandalorian. So I did watch The Mandalorian, and I generally really enjoyed the Mandalorian seasons that have been out. And that kind of primed me for being like, okay, maybe the Skywalker saga is dead. But I've always said, and I've agreed with people that have said, that Star Wars is a whole universe full of possibilities, and you could tell any characters at any time with any genre in there. And, you know, you could still call it a Star Wars universe thing. And I thought, you know, Rogue One was fun, not really substantive, but fun. I thought Solo was actually the best like Star Wars movie that we've had since Empire, or Return of the Jedi, I guess. It was really well done. So then I was kind of like, all right, so maybe there's still life left to Star Wars. We started out with saying, I want this stuff to be good. I want to see a Jurassic Park movie. Every time a Jurassic Park, Terminator, Aliens, something comes out, because of, you know, like our foundation laid as kids and the nostalgia, but also just knowing that there's good stories in these universes that could be told. I'm hopeful. I get a little spark of hope every time a new franchise movie comes out, that I'm like, maybe this time. What did
you think of Kenobi?
Well, that's what I was going to get to. So The Mandalorian gave me a little bit of that. This time, Disney actually gave me something that was quality. I mean, I have my nitpicks with The Mandalorian, but generally, like, I thought it was good Star Wars universe kind of story. Yeah. And like I said, Solo was, you know, Rogue One were passable. So by the time Boba Fett then came out, I was like, oh my God, they had no story to tell here. It was just ridiculous, like how lazy and stupid that show was, and disjointed.
I feel like they spent
all over the place,
all of their money on the last episode, like all of
which was a bunch of crap. Like, hey, remember the Rancor?
I mean, that was cool as hell. It was just dumb.
It was cool. Yeah. It was a cool moment, but it didn't mean anything. Like, it was so dumb. Okay, so Boba Fett was dumb, but then I was like, all right. I knew that when they announced like Rogue One and stuff and Solo, they had also announced a bunch of movies, like prequel movies or offshoot movies, the Star Wars stories movies. And they had announced Boba Fett and Obi-Wan. So I knew that those shows are going to be reworked movies. But I saw how well that went with Boba Fett. But man, Kenobi was another one where I was just like, okay, obviously it was basically what you said before. Like, in my opinion, they had one thing they were trying to get to, which was that showdown at the end of the last episode where Vader says that he killed Anakin. That moment I thought was awesome. That was what the whole show was supposed to be, but it didn't need to be a show. It should have been a 2-hour movie without the Leia stuff, without that Inquisitor. I forgot her name already. all that stuff was so pointless and needless, just filler for all they wanted to do was, I think all they had on their board that you were saying earlier was, we need to get Obi-Wan and Vader to this point. We have 6 episodes, 45-minute episodes or whatever to do that. So what are we going to do? Well, let's just throw in all this random crap
Well,
just
they
to
probably
fill up
had
time.
Leia up there too. Like they probably had a big board of what we want to do with Star Wars. And like, well, we need Leia somewhere. We need little
let's just
girl
shove
Leia
her in
action
here.
figures and costumes. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
oh,
I
yeah.
was fine with the whole Inquisitor thing. I thought it was cool that Obi-Wan gave up
Sure.
everything and he was just watching Jedis get killed and not helping. I thought that was great. The Leia thing just didn't need to happen. Or it could have happened, but it had nothing to do with Vader.
Right.
Like it could have just been, oh, Obi-Wan did go save Princess Leia from something, or maybe they found out about her. But the Vader stuff never needed to happen. They didn't need him in that.
I agree.
It could have been 2 completely different shows.
At least.
You know? And Inquisitors were cool, but they didn't do much with them. You never got to see Obi-Wan kill them all or do anything badass, you know?
They set up like a whole squadron of Inquisitors that weren't even in the last episode.
Yeah.
What was the point of any of that?
I thought they would slow play it like they did with the first one with Rey, where the whole time you think you're getting Luke and you never get Luke. I thought the whole series would be about him trying to save Leia from the Inquisitors and hide her from Vader, and Vader shows up at the very end. I didn't think they'd be third episode they're fighting. What?
That was,
we didn't need
that almost
any
broke
of that.
Me.
Yeah, it was just an Obi-Wan. I mean, Ewan McGregor's great, but it's just bad. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it's not something I'd go back and watch.
Agreed.
The first couple Mandos I'll go back and watch. They did a great thing of it was some stupid I guess a GIF or something. There's a Boba Fett one where everyone's at a sports bar and their team's losing. It's Boba Fett on the screen, and then Mando comes out and everyone's like, yeah, and it saves the series. You know? And I'm like, that's kind of true. Like I think halfway through they're like, no one cares. Boba Fett was supposed to be evil and mean. That's supposed to be a good guy. Make him a bad guy.
Right.
You know?
Or an anti-hero at least.
Yeah, Finnick was killing everyone when she fought Mando. That's awesome. Why make her? You need to. It's so weird.
It's just so uninspired. I think, just going back to what we were saying, it's just content. They just need to fill these slots on their streaming services and their theater show times. They need to keep their franchises alive, and they have some ideas filling that hole of the inconsistency of when Obi-Wan tells Luke in A New Hope that, Vader betrayed and killed your father, to tie that up was a nice idea. That moment worked for me, but it didn't need that whole show to make that happen. It wasn't necessary. It was
didn't need
kind of
a
waste of time.
I didn't need any of that. It could have been 2 different shows altogether. The same with Boba Fett. I didn't understand. I was so excited for that because when he showed up in Mando, it was sick. Like he was a badass. I don't know. Sometimes you don't need to know. I think it's better not knowing. That whole show, like, I assume the first episode, like, he's just going to be killing people. He's going to be brutal. Like Logan, we were watching it, and it's when, like, they had to have the 2 Jabbas come up and talk to him. Logan was like, why didn't you just kill him? Like, he's like, wouldn't Boba Fett just kill him if they got in his way? And I was like, you would think. Like, what? Why?
Well, he was reborn out of the Sarlacc pit, and he's a nice guy now.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted that either. People were. I've seen videos and stuff from essays where people are like, well, actually, if you look at it like this, it's actually an interesting story because Boba Fett, like we never really knew that much about him.
You have to justify it and write an article. Like it means it's not
exactly.
Good.
That's the prequels to me too. All these like think pieces and stuff have come out since then, justifying them. But yeah, exactly. Like if you need to like break it down in a thesis paper about why it's actually good, the presentation of it wasn't good, and you can't defend people's like intuitive reaction to not liking something, even if you think there was substance there, it doesn't change the experience. Which, like you said, I think what you just said about Obi-Wan sums up all this stuff to me. Is it's fine. I enjoyed it for what it was at the time, but it didn't stick with me, and I'll never go back and watch it.
No.
I'll never have any reason to.
I mean, I'll say I watched the Vader scene a couple times. That was pretty cool when they fought, but
because that's the one thing that actually mattered.
Yeah,
and and I hate to say it because Marvel's become kind of like a punching bag in a way because they're big dogs and all the same stuff we've been saying. It absolutely you said about them, and it's been said, done to death. But just from my experience, like I originally thought that doing this episodic movie thing, like making movies like a TV series, was an interesting format. The hype train I thought was fun for like a decade leading up to Endgame. Like all the Marvel stuff was fun. Like looking at the East. I mean, not every movie was amazing, but the experience of like watching, and I'm sure like a lot of people, we watched or rewatched the Marvel movies up to Endgame during the pandemic with the kids.
Oh yeah.
Because we had the time. And it was really fun, like going back and watching it all as like a completed work. Like it starts at Iron Man, ends at Endgame, and everything it happened in between. There were inconsistencies and flaws and problems, but overall, like, you could see kind of where they were going and how it evolved, and it was fun. And then so like when the Disney Plus stuff came around, I was on board with the idea originally, because the big thing that stood out to me from watching the Marvel stuff was how many characters didn't really get a chance to shine, or how much stuff had to happen off screen because they didn't have time for it in the movies, especially developing the secondary characters like Wanda and stuff.
Yeah.
So like WandaVision, I thought was a good idea for a show. The Falcon and Winter Soldier show, I thought was a good idea at first, but
I didn't make it through.
I started seeing this pattern though, and in every show, the shows seem to have a somewhat of a vision and a story to tell, but then just like the movies, the end is always just a big CGI boss battle that the show didn't earn or even like build up to necessarily. And it leaves you feeling kind of cold, and it's kind of anticlimactic, even though it's supposed to be a big spectacle climax. And then once that I saw that formula like over and over, I watched all the way through. What was the last one we watched? I think it was Hawkeye. Was the last one we watched together.
Hawkeye.
We were watching them together with the family, and all the shows had the same issues of being like a little too convoluted and like not really cohesive, and every episode kind of like had its own kind of thing going on, but they were supposed to be this like arc, and the Star Wars shows are like that too. They didn't feel like a consistent arc from the beginning to the end. They kind of meandered around and circled back or didn't circle back to things, and then it led up to something maybe kind of cool, but it didn't get there like in a cohesive way. But then Hawkeye, reintroduced like Kingpin. Jess and I had watched the Netflix Defenders stuff, right before it went back to Disney Plus. So
those were great.
Yeah, like overall, I thought those were
like
I did a podcast about those. Oh, Punisher was fantastic.
It was great. Yeah.
But the Disney Plus stuff, it's showing me now that there's a formula and there's a lack of true vision for this stuff like they had when they were doing the Infinity Saga. And it's also bland and interchangeable now, that even though I like the idea of having a little bit longer form, but still like miniseries-esque shows to flesh out some of the side characters from the movies that could complement the movies and make the whole movie experience better. But I haven't seen Doctor Strange or Thor at this point, because I don't know, I just don't care anymore.
The new Doctor Strange was actually kind of cool. I only watched because it's on Disney Plus, and Logan thought it was amazing, and it was cool. Like I actually kind of enjoyed it. I mean, do you know the plot at all?
Yeah, I do. I watch all videos and stuff about it.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Wanda goes insane. She becomes a villain. She's obsessed with finding her kid. She finally finds them, and they end up being so scared of her, she just kills herself and gives up on everything and stops what she's doing. I thought it was cool as shit. Her just lighting up all these superheroes we love, like the alternate units, Captain America and Miss Marvel, and
the Illuminati,
killing Professor X and the stretchy guy, Reed Richards.
Mr. Fantastic. Yeah.
Like when she killed all them, it was so great. Like it was cool. Like one guy, like if he opens his mouth, he'll die. And they're like, if he opens his mouth, he'll die. And she's like, what mouth?
Black
and
Bolt.
she just and then he blows up. Like, it was brutal. It was like the other ones. God, I hadn't seen the last Spider-Man. I just don't care anymore.
I enjoyed it. It's
when it comes
Marvel
out for
has
free,
this
I'll
thing
watch
where
it.
Marvel just has this thing where I'm like, I enjoy it just like the Last Jedi. Like I enjoy it, seeing it. It's fun popcorn entertainment, but then afterwards, I'm like, couldn't they have just tried a little bit harder?
Well, I
couldn't
think
they have put a little bit more?
They have a schedule, and they also need to take a break.
Yeah.
The Eternals or whatever, that was terrible. I couldn't even.
I like the idea. It was so it was so heady sci-fi, but it just that should have been a show. So many characters. Like why shove that into a movie?
It's very awkward because like representation, especially since I married Greece, like it does mean a lot. There needs to be representation, but it doesn't need to be shoved in your face. It should just be there. And the Eternals was trying to represent everybody, and like Marvel's first gay character, Marvel's first this, and it's like, but you didn't need to make it so blatant. It could have just been there, you know?
Well, like I was saying earlier, I mean, people know when they're being pandered to. Like, it doesn't help any cause to just be like, oh yeah, we're down. It's like,
you know, you can have
you have to do it authentically.
It's just so weird the way they're doing stuff. And I know a lot of people like Captain Marvel, but like that's another one. Me and Chris left the theater. That was the worst movie I've ever seen. Yeah, I hated it so much. I hated the actress. I hated her more than anything now. But she's good in other stuff. So I don't know what happened.
I know, isn't that funny?
It's so weird. She's really, really good in other stuff. And in that movie,
I think she
didn't want to do it. I think she just got paid so much money. And she's like, well, I guess superheroes are campy and dumb. Let's play it that way.
I think that's, like, isn't that a lot of these. It's like everybody has to be in a Marvel movie now. It's just an expectation. You can't have a career if you're not in a Marvel movie.
Yeah, it's just so bad. That one was so horrible. I don't even know which ones are coming out next. I think they should have reset and just done the mutants since they got that back.
Yeah.
Let's redo the X-Men and build up another franchise for 10 years. We don't need all this other crap.
Well, you should go if you're curious. You know, Comic-Con just happened. They released their next 3 phases, I think, 2 or 3 phases. Yeah,
but they're missing a ton of stuff.
Oh yeah, they are.
They say they're going to release that at the Disney Con or whatever they do, D23 or whatever that is.
They obviously have a plan moving forward, but it seems like the quality of the content is declining because they're rushing. They're trying to, like, you know, force too much before they have it finessed. I'm going to kind of bow out for a while. And see how things pan out, but instead of sticking with it. Same with Star Wars, I'm really frustrated with, and I'm out for the foreseeable future. We'll see how Mando 3 comes around, but you know, just because I've already watched it.
Are they even doing movies? Are they even making a movie at this point?
As far as I know, I don't think they have a specific time frame for the next movie because they're Disney Plus, you know, is like where all of their
content. Yeah, Star Wars I've given up on. I mean, I like TV shows, but it's also maybe because I'm like have a baby and kids and I don't get to go out. So it's something to throw on and watch. It's convenient. Yeah, even the Marvel movies, like I can't see me going to the theater. The only thing I'm gonna go to the theater for probably is to see Avatar this year. Because Carice never saw it in 3D, which is half the point.
That'll be worth it just for that.
Yeah, I think there's something else coming out at the end of the year that kind of interests me. I can't remember what. But movies in general, like at theater, I don't know. It better be good.
We've seen or taken the kids to some stuff because of, you know, the pandemic, especially wanting to get back out there. But seeing No Way Home in the theater with the kids was really fun. It left the same kind of taste in my mouth as most of the Marvel stuff. It was fun, but I'm just haven't really thought about it much since. It hasn't really stuck with me. It's just, it was entertainment, but it wasn't like, I don't know. It didn't have that lasting wow factor. That's the thing about these franchises that I think the reason that people are so frustrated with them, but they're also, you know, so ubiquitous is because like Terminator, Jurassic Park, and Aliens and Star Wars and Robocop and Ninja Turtles and the stuff that we love from our childhood started out so impactful. And even watching it now, you can see why future generations are interested in this stuff, or up and coming generations, and like why it had such an impact on us. It wasn't just because aliens look cool or scary or because Terminators look cool or because dinosaurs are cool. It's because they told amazing stories with amazing, innovative filmmaking techniques, and all together as a package. They were works of art that were timeless and, you know, passionate, said something and meant something to people and still do. But
you said it back earlier with the limitations. I think that made those movies better. I think that's the whole thing. Like we're seeing, like
forces creativity.
Yeah, and also forces you to hide stuff. You know?
Yeah, to have a little bit of subtlety and a little bit of restrictiveness to your storytelling and your presentation instead of just throwing everything at the screen and just hoping that something sticks.
Me and Chris talk about, obviously she does film and all that, and it's like there aren't good stuff made anymore. Like it's all kind of trash. Like
doesn't it just feel like
we love?
I didn't like you were saying,
Ghostbusters,
I thought it got too much of a pass for being passable. It was fine, but it wasn't good.
Yeah,
like you were saying earlier, like things are just repackaged, whether it's from nostalgia or they're just copying and pasting from something else that already worked. There's nothing inspiring these things to come around now. They're just keep the train rolling.
Do you think we'll ever stop getting roped in though? Like, I'm excited for the new Predator. It looks cool. I probably saw the best parts of the movie already, though.
It's a good way to kind of wrap this up. I think the reason I wanted to make this episode, when you saw Dominion and said, hey, we need to do a podcast, I was trying to give Disney the benefit of the doubt with Star Wars and Marvel, that even if it's mostly schlock and it's just entertainment for escapism's sake, not really substantive, but I was trying to hope that because I was already invested in these franchises, that there could be something to get out of it more than just, this is how I can spend a couple hours and, not just sit there and drool on myself. But
No.
after all these things, going through this cycle so many times now, so many times in a small amount of time because of watching all the Disney Plus stuff, especially, I think I've finally gotten to the point where I'm like, and I've also made it a point, I've intentionally not gone on my way to see Dark Fate, to see Rise of Skywalker, to see Fast and Furious, to see the latest Jurassic Park. And I didn't want to see the latest Harry Potter, really. But
Harry
we
Potter's
took
still going on.
the Fantastic
Oh,
Beasts. But like I
got
wouldn't
that
have seen
fired
that
from.
either.
Yeah.
That's where I am. Like, to answer your question, no, I think I'm kind of out unless somebody tells me, oh my God, you won't believe they did it. They brought back aliens and it's finally good again. Which is why I watched Mandalorian, because I was done with Star Wars after Last Jedi, but people were like, come on, man, Mandalorian, you got to see it. It's actually really good. And so I gave it a chance and I was pleasantly surprised for the most part, but then they just Last Jedi'd me again. They keep ruining it.
Well,
So
Boba Fett was trash. I mean, it was funny. It was trash, though. I just wonder, like, when all this happened, in part because of the pandemic, they could just get away with putting whatever they wanted out because people are sitting at home to watch it.
But it's been happening for a long time, though.
Well, yeah.
That's escalated it because they started hammering home all this stuff like really fast and just one thing after another. And it's almost like they don't even care if they fail because they're already on to the next thing. They're not taking time to learn from their mistakes and from audience disapproval or whatever. It's like, here's the next thing. Before we even know if this thing's good, we've already made the next thing and we're getting ready to release it.
Yeah.
There's no time to change gears or to right the ship.
I mean, the only reason I have mild hope in the new Predator movie is they didn't have faith in it and they sold it cheap to Hulu. So is it actually something that will be good?
Who knows? You'll have to tell me because I'm not going to watch it on my own unless somebody tells me I should.
I'll watch it because it's free. But I pay for Hulu, but I wouldn't pay. Alien vs. Predator 2 got me.
God.
Go back and watch it. It's really great.
We saw that together on Christmas Day, I think, you, me, and Dave.
Yeah, I had the guy from Rescue Me in it. It was beyond bad.
Oh, yeah.
I need to feed a baby.
All right, yeah, I can tell. Hey, Apollo, thanks for hanging in there, bud. Yeah, you're a good boy. You did good. Good first podcast. Yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, let's pick a movie and shred it.
Okay. Before I call it a day on this one, I wanted to wrap up with a couple franchises that Jason and I either touched on just briefly or didn't get to at all. The first one, not being a franchise specifically, but more of a genre, is the horror genre and especially slasher flicks. Like I mentioned earlier, I was pretty intentionally sheltered and censored from content that wasn't really age appropriate for me when I was younger, which at the time, was kind of annoying, but I really appreciate it now because I wasn't desensitized to things like some of my peers were. Like seeing Aliens for the first time, or Alien, and anything in the horror genre. Like I remember going to see Scream when I was about 14 in the theaters, and I really had no context for what it was going to be. I actually found those things effectively shocking because I wasn't too cool for school and I hadn't already seen all of it and been desensitized to it. So I think that was a big reason that the horror genre in general had a big impact on me when I was younger, because I was scared of it, scared of the concept, scared of the gore, spooked out by the atmosphere and all the things that make those movies and those stories so much fun to engage with. And I got really into like Freddy and Hellraiser, those iconic horror villains from the 80s and 90s. But the big one was Halloween for me. I just thought Michael Myers was the scariest and coolest, villain ever, because he was the embodiment of evil. And I've mentioned this before a long time ago on my music side of this podcast, which when we would go off and talk about movies, I retooled that into the first episode of this movie podcast and talking about Rob Zombie's take on it and everything. I just thought Michael Myers was scary because he was kind of like the Terminator. He was like an unstoppable evil force with a singular goal that he couldn't be deterred from. Speaking of retooling things, I was so into this stuff as a teenager I remember taking some of my old action figures, namely my old Star Trek The Next Generation action figures, and like using razor blades and paint and sewing needles and stuff to like make Michael Myers and Freddy and Pinhead out of those characters. I wish I still had them or had any photographic evidence of them, but my point is though is that those things were really meaningful to me for a lot of different reasons. And like, you know, Freddy was one, like I mentioned earlier with Aliens and Terminator and Jurassic Park. It was one that really made me question the craft. Like, oh, that was a really cool special effect. How did they do that? And just in general, like, why were these stories, even the bad ones or the silly ones, like, why were they so effective for me? Why was the genre and the tone so effective for me? Got me interested in storytelling and character and stuff. But I also think that these films and this genre in particular is a really good example of like the Oroborus issue at play here, where, I mean, obviously, like, Halloween started eating itself back in the 90s, so this is not a new thing. I don't want to just blame, like, you know, the consolidation of the big studios and Disney and everything, or the current culture of writing and hedging their bets and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's been going on for decades. But I gotta say though, at least, you know, with like these franchises, even if they were getting repetitive and redundant and kind of eating themselves in small ways, there was still some spark, there was some innovation, there was some reason that they were still making these movies, and they were moving forward. They were making sequels. They weren't just rebooting it over and over and over again. As bad as the Halloween sequels got, they were still trying to build on a story or create a new story. Not that it was good, but they were trying to do something that wasn't purely just nostalgia. And when they did try that, it actually worked out pretty well. Halloween H2O was the best crafted Halloween sequel since, you know, Halloween 2. But then I think Halloween Resurrection kind of kicked off the era, and then of course Rob Zombie's stuff of not being imaginative, not being innovative, not trying to do something new, not having a spark, just going back to the beginning and then eating itself like the Oroborus. So fast forward to now, we have Halloween Ends coming up this fall, and I saw Halloween 2018 because there's already been Halloween, and then Halloween by Rob Zombie, and then Halloween, a sequel to Halloween, not Halloween 2. But I saw that one just because generally fans and critics seem to say that it was at least pretty good. It was worth watching. And yeah, like I saw it and kind of passively enjoyed it just for being what it was. But it also, I walked away from it feeling like when I walk away from Marvel movies, just kind of like, meh. And I haven't thought about it or really wanted to return to it for any reason since. And just like a lot of these movies, and going back to Star Wars and The Last Jedi and stuff, the more I've thought about it afterwards in the script, it's kind of aggravating to frustrating how contrived and lazy they are when they're trying to do something quote unquote new or subvert expectations because they know that they're treading the same ground. It just all feels so tired. And it's really disappointing because I really have a place in my heart for these characters, as horrific as some of them are. Another example of this that I didn't get to with Jason is Star Trek. I have a long history with Star Trek because my dad was a big sci-fi geek. He watched original OG Star Trek when it was, you know, first airing in the 60s. I believe one of my parents' first dates was seeing Star Wars in the theater. One of my earliest memories of going to the theater to see a movie was Star Trek V. Some of my earliest memories of hanging out with my family were watching Star Trek movies, the OG cast, and also Next Generation. So again, super special place in my heart for the nostalgia, but also so much great stuff to glean from it, and just the overall tone and themes of Star Trek have always stuck with me. A lot of lines from the Star Trek films with the original cast, and a lot of the episode themes of The Next Generation about hope and inclusiveness and open-mindedness, adventure, all these kind of like productive and constructive themes in some way help shape my outlook, because these were the things that were influencing me, you know, via my parents' introduction and willingness to indulge and engage with this stuff. It was all very inspirational. So, you know, as Star Trek went on, I never watched the later stuff of Voyager or Enterprise. But of course, you know, I always consider myself a Star Trek fan. Even when the J.J. Abrams reboot came out, I really enjoyed it. Again, you know, for what it was. I knew that it was not traditional Trek, but it did feel like, because of the Kelvin timeline split thing that they were trying to do at least give themselves the freedom to do different and newer things, even if it wasn't OG Trek kind of stuff and it was more homogenized action hero, Star Trek, Star Wars-esque kind of storytelling. At least it was keeping Trek alive. And I did feel like that even after Into Darkness, which is definitely an example of eating itself. And that was one that, as time went by and the more I thought about it, But I only watched Star Trek Beyond because of the general critical acclaim and people telling me that, like, oh, if you like Trek, like, this is a return to form kind of thing. And I saw it and I felt nothing. It was so bland and so contrived, so predictable, so boring, just disappointingly boring and unengaging that I was done with Trek after that movie. So once CBS All Access came around and they put out Discovery and then later Picard and then it became Paramount Plus, I just had no interest in it. Had that same effect that all these other franchises had, like this one that started at the beginning for me that I've always held out hope. And that seems to be the main thing that is the problem. I haven't seen any of these newer iterations, so I am speaking from, I would say, educated ignorance here, because I do watch a lot of reviews and breakdowns and reactions and stuff on YouTube just to kind of keep up with what's going on in these worlds that I love, even if I'm not going to devote the time to actually like watch it all myself. But from what I hear, and it's been repeated so many times that I don't think that I'm just arbitrarily making it up, it sounds like these showrunners and creators and producers and writers don't care about what made Trek Trek, which was all the positive, constructive, productive things I just said. It sounds like much more of a reflection of the mores of our modern time, which is like anxiety and cynicism and darkness. And that stuff is fine. You can absolutely explore the shadow side, the dark side, as it were, of the human condition in any kind of media, and it doesn't have to be shied away from or ignored. It's there. It's an important thing to explore. But if that's like the overt tone and themes of your show is like nihilism, I'm sorry, but no thank you. It just sounds like Discovery and Picard are super violent and gruesome and just mean-spirited. And then also like all of the nostalgia and things are being retconned. They're showing characters and using characters and sets and ships and storylines and stuff that have been, set up since the beginning, and that's all fine if they want to expand on that, but it sounds like they're doing what like Lucas did and so on, where they're taking something kind of sacred and they're just screwing with it. They're changing things arbitrarily just because they can, and overall, really, it just sounds super unenjoyable. I mean, in the end, I think that's what it really comes down to for me, is that it's not even about them messing with something that I don't actually have any proprietary stake in. I didn't create this stuff. I don't own it. I don't have any rights to say what it should be or shouldn't be. But what I do know is that there is certain kind of content that I just enjoy watching for a lot of different reasons. And none of this stuff sounds fun or worth my time. It just happens to be the franchises that I once loved and adored. But now it's just become schlock that just doesn't matter anymore, which is painful to say because I was just railing against cynicism, and this stuff has made me feel really cynical. And I want to have hope. I keep hearing that like, well, maybe Discovery's too dark, but Lower Decks was funny, and Strange New Worlds is like a, refreshing kind of recapturing of the old tone of Star Trek. But that's not what I'm looking for in this content anymore. There has been so much Trek. I don't need them to make more Trek like there already was. We've already seen that. You can give me new Trek, a new Star Wars, a new Jurassic Park, a new Terminator, but give me something worth watching that is meaningful, that has inspiration, that has value, not just content for content's sake. That's the point. And finally, this is the one that originally inspired this episode in the first place. I wanted to do a whole episode just tearing apart the Fantastic Beasts movie and looking at Harry Potter as a franchise. And the more I thought about and I was preparing for just that episode, it bled into all of these other franchises. And I was like, everything I want to say about that, I could say also about Star Wars, and I can say about aliens and etc. And then Jason and I were talking because he saw Jurassic Park Dominion, and he was saying a lot of the same stuff. So I was like, okay, there's a bigger picture thing happening here, of course. And the internet has already dissected and distilled down all of the nitpicky and super like microscopic points that I could make about why all this stuff doesn't work. I would love to go through like every Fantastic Beasts movie, for instance, and pick apart like why they're so obnoxious to me. But all that stuff has already been said. It's all out there already. I don't need to redundantly cover that ground more. All I want to add to the conversation is, just like I was saying with Trek and all these other things, Harry Potter is a very meaningful franchise to me because I had vaguely heard about it when I was like late in high school, but I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was like a kid show or something. I just heard the name Harry Potter being kicked around a little bit, but it was just books at that point, so it wasn't popular, but it wasn't in like the mainstream zeitgeist like it is now. But I was in an AP English class my senior year, and I had a very young teacher. I think she was like 24 at the time, and she wanted to take a break from all of like the hardcore, dark, cynical Wuthering Heights, you know, and like Jane Eyre kind of British tragedy content. That was the major part of that curriculum. And she wanted us to read something fun and kind of have like a palate cleanser. And even though a lot of kids complained because they were like, oh, we're not sticking to the curriculum, we're not going to pass the test, which, I mean, as far as I know, everybody did fine on the test. I did okay. Not enough to earn college credit, unfortunately, but, you know, maybe if I had tried a little harder. I can say that it wasn't Harry Potter's fault that I didn't. But she had us read the Sorcerer's Stone, and actually, I think I only read like half of it because I had gotten the flu or something that year, really bad. And by the time I recovered from that, like we had moved on to another unit or something. But just even having had the opportunity to go back and read something, because, you know, as a 17, 18-year-old, like, I would have my sights set on college. I was going to New York. I was going to the big city. I felt super serious and self-important, and I wanted to be a writer. Kids fiction like just wasn't interesting to me at that point because I was becoming an adult and I was taking myself really seriously. But having a teacher that I respected so much give us an assignment like that, it just kind of like triggered something in me that when I went to college, I was in New York and I was on the subways, and we didn't have smartphones in 2001. So I decided to finish that Harry Potter book because I'm a completionist and I can't leave loose ends hanging. So I finished Sorcerer's Stone, and then I immediately picked up Chamber of Secrets because I had found that my mom had actually read the first 4 books that were out at the time and had them in the house. So I gobbled those up my freshman year of college, and I was totally hooked. And what happened for me at that point in my life where I was so, you know, serious and I'm going to New York, I'm going to be a writer, and I'm, you know, so self-important, it reminded me of the joy and the exuberance of youth. And the reason that I fell in love with all these franchises in the first place, it made me appreciate not just the stories and the characters and the films and the books and stuff that I had loved as a kid more, but it reminded me of why I like them in the first place and how I felt when I first engaged with these things. Even like the heavier stuff, like when I first saw Halloween and was scared out of my mind, or when I saw Terminator 2 and was scared out of my mind about how violent and intense it was. It still came with that like kind of youthful, excitable energy of like, God, this is awesome, I want more. And Harry Potter was that for me as a young adult. So after having read The Goblet of Fire, that was that long period between where JK was writing Order of the Phoenix, and, you know, I started getting into all the internet hype, and I was on message boards and fan pages and live journals and reading blogs and fan theories and stuff. And then I gobbled up all the books. I went to the Barnes & Noble midnight release of Half-Blood Prince. And then by the time I was graduating college, Deathly Hallows came out. And by that point, you know, it was at like an epic cultural peak. And the movies had started coming out too. They started that my freshman year when I was still reading the first 4 books. The first movie came out. And you can hear my thoughts about the films a little bit more on a couple episodes ago, 17, I think, with my friend Kelly. Even though the movies weren't my favorite output in general of the franchise, I still went to every one at midnight premiere and just excited to see all that stuff on screen, even though I knew it wasn't going to be as good as the books or as engaging as the books, but it was still part of that whole thing. And I was pleasantly surprised by the time they got to the 8th movie. It was kind of the best one in some ways. So at least they ended on a high note, and we had that body of work to look back on. I had no doubt that they were going to continue the franchise in some way on screen. So I was really excited by the time Fantastic Beasts came out. But then once I saw it, it was that same kind of like, well, that was 2 hours of my time, on to something else. It wasn't offensively bad, but it was such an Oroborus output of itself because it tried to do some new things. When they introduced Grindelwald at the end, I was like, oh no, this isn't going to be its own story. It's just a prequel. Not again. And then I wanted to hope that the subsequent films would like give us something to justify this prequel thing, but it was not just more of the same, but worse. It just kept getting worse. But now I'm at the age where I have kids that are old enough to be into this stuff. My daughter especially is really into Harry Potter, and we went to the Wizarding World in Orlando at Universal Studios last spring. We specifically did that this year because the kids were old enough to appreciate it, but not too old to not care. And we had a blast, and it was so much fun getting to see a lot of the tangible imagery and getting wands and drinking butterbeer and stuff. It was so much fun, but it was all nostalgia. It was giving me something comfortable and delicious that I knew was going to be good, and I indulged with it the way that it was meant to be. But then a couple months later, Secrets of Dumbledore came out, and I really just didn't want to see it because I didn't want to have that good taste in my mouth be bittered by what I knew was going to be a substandard, even if slightly better than The Crimes of Grindelwald. After everything that we've talked about on this podcast and all the different franchises that have already disappointed me, I knew in my heart that Dumbledore wasn't going to change things, even if it was slightly better. And having seen it, all my fears were confirmed. The worst of them being, though, that I was bored out of my mind. I didn't care about anything going on or any of the characters, any of the situations, nothing. It was total waste of time. I don't want this to just be a cynical, mean-spirited criticism of things I don't like. I would like the takeaway from this to be that there is great content and stories out there that have been told, and that even though they say like every story under the sun has already been told, or there's the hero with 1,000 faces and all that, it doesn't change how these things can impact an individual at any point in their life. Just because most of my favorite franchises from my youth have been Oroborus, they've eaten themselves, or they're in the process of doing so, doesn't mean that I haven't been affected by other things outside of that. There has been some great stuff, and I'll point you to, I think it was episode 16 where I talked about pretension in film and how I've found what works for me in there. A lot of great stuff is out there and continues to be made. I think what this is just my kind of swan song, my disillusionment, or I don't know, maybe my growing up of understanding that just because I love something once doesn't mean that the continuation of it is always going to be that thing that it was. But it doesn't change the quality of the thing that it was at the time, or even that it is now, because I can still watch A New Hope and I can watch Terminator 2 and love and appreciate them, and still have those feelings for them that I did when I first saw them, and glean new stuff from them as I get older with new perspectives and new contexts and understandings. But for now, this is definitely a bit of a drop the mic or walk away or drawing a line in the sand for sticking with any of these franchises and being an apologist, or really just wasting any of my time hoping against hope that something new from one of these franchises is going to rekindle or spark that flame that I had for it originally. I want to be proven wrong. I hope to be proven wrong that there can be some outstanding Trek or Jurassic Park or Michael Myers content on the horizon. And I swear, if it bubbles up, if I hear enough positive, constructive, and wow factor feedback about something, I will definitely give it a chance. But I am done watching things just because it's associated with an IP or a franchise that I love or once loved. Be sure to visit breathingundерwater.us
Follow me on Instagram at breathingunderwater1
and on Twitter and TikTok at Breathing Dakine. That's at Breathing DAKINE.
and drop me a line at breathingunderwater1@gmail.com. Please note that I do not claim any ownership of any media presented in this podcast, which is only used for promotional purposes unless otherwise noted. And all views and opinions are those of the person expressing them and do not represent any other entities discussed in this podcast.